Oh, honey, you should see your face when you try to tell a story. Matthew's voice rang out across our living room, drawing snickers from our gathered friends. She never gets to the point, just rambles on and on. It's like watching someone try to parallel park blindfolded. My cheeks burned as familiar laughter filled the room. I gripped my wine glass tighter, forcing the practiced smile I'd worn for the past 5 years of our marriage. Inside, something snapped. My name is Tasha Reynolds, and at 32, I'm tired of being the punchline to every one of my husband's jokes. I work as a marketing executive at one of Houston's top firms, managing million-dollar campaigns and a team of 15 people. But at home, I'm just Matthew's favorite target, the subject of his endless jokes about everything from my cooking to my appearance. Tonight was supposed to be a casual dinner with friends, but like every other social gathering, it had turned into the Matthew show. He was in rare form, entertaining our guests with story after story, each one designed to make me look foolish. When I tried to share news about my recent promotion at work, he cut in with a comment about how I probably slept through the meeting where they announced it, since I could sleep through an earthquake. More laughter. More stares. Seriously, though, he continued, draping his arm around my shoulders in that possessive way he had, you should see her try to give presentations at work. Remember that time you called me crying because you forgot the client's name? That never happened. But Matthew had a way of making up stories that sounded just plausible enough, mixing in small truths with his fabrications, until even I sometimes questioned my own memories. And always, when I tried to defend myself, he'd just smile that condescending smile and say, "Relax, it's just a joke." I watched him holding court in our living room, so confident, so sure of his power over me and this audience. But what he didn't know was that I had finally reached my limit. His biggest secret, the one he'd begged me to keep quiet about, was burning in my throat. As I sat there watching him perform, I felt a dangerous clarity settling over me. Maybe it was time for everyone to hear a really funny story. In the beginning, Matthew's jokes seemed harmless enough. We met at a company party where I was representing my marketing firm. He was charming, successful, and when he teased me about spilling my drink, it felt playful rather than cruel. "You're adorable when you're flustered," he'd said, helping me clean up. I mistook his mockery for flirtation. The changes were so subtle at first, a joke here and there about my terrible sense of direction in front of his friends, comments about how I couldn't dress myself without his help. Each time he'd follow up with expensive gifts and romantic gestures, as if to compensate for the sting of his words. I had always been confident in my abilities. My boss, Alex, used to praise my presentation skills and sharp mind. But somewhere along the line, Matthew's constant jokes started seeping into my consciousness. I began second-guessing myself in meetings, hearing his mocking voice in my head. Our wedding day should have been a warning. During his speech, he had the whole room laughing at stories about my clumsiness and forgetfulness. My father looked uncomfortable, but everyone else seemed to find it hilarious. I told myself it was just Matthew's way of expressing love, through humor. The intimacy issues started about 2 years ago. At first, Matthew blamed work stress, then my neediness. When we finally saw a doctor and learned about his impotence, something in him changed. The jokes became meaner, more frequent. It was as if he needed to tear me down to build himself up. "Don't tell anyone," he'd begged after the diagnosis. "This stays between us." I had agreed, wanting to protect him. Even as his public humiliation of me grew worse, I kept his secret. That's what a good wife does, right? Last week, I overheard him on the phone with his friend Brad, making up stories about how I was frigid and impossible to please. My blood boiled as I listened to him twist our private struggles into another opportunity to mock me. I've spent 5 years of my life shrinking myself to avoid becoming the punchline of his next joke. 5 years of forcing laughs while dying inside. 5 years of keeping his secrets while he broadcast my every flaw, real or imagined, to the world. Looking around our living room now at these people who've laughed at his jokes for years, I wonder if they'd still find him so amusing if they knew the truth. "And here's the best part," Matthew was saying. his voice rising with dramatic flair. Last week, Tasha actually tried to cook a romantic dinner. You should have seen it. Burnt to a crisp, smoke everywhere. She can't even boil water without having a crisis. The laughter felt like needles on my skin. The truth was, I'd spent hours preparing that dinner, trying to create a space for us to talk about our issues. The smoke had only happened because I was distracted by a call from Matthew saying he'd be late. Again. Brad's wife, Jennifer, leaned forward, wine glass in hand. At least she tries, Matt. When's the last time you cooked anything? I felt a flutter of gratitude, but Matthew quickly crushed it. Oh, I make sure she's satisfied in other ways, he smirked, throwing me a knowing look. Right, honey? The room erupted in suggestive laughter. I felt my face burning as I watched Matthew bask in their reaction. He knew exactly what he was doing, redirecting attention from his own inadequacies by hinting at a lie. Actually, I started to say, but Matthew cut me off. Careful now, sweetheart. We don't want you embarrassing yourself again. His tone was light, playful even, but his eyes held a warning. Remember last month at the Stevens party, when you tried to tell that story about your client meeting? That wasn't... I tried again. See what I mean? Matthew interrupted, addressing our friends. She gets so confused sometimes. Good thing she has me to keep her straight. Brad and the others chuckled, but I noticed Jennifer watching me with concern. The room felt suffocating, years of accumulated humiliation pressing down on my chest. Then Matthew delivered the final blow. You know what's funny? He was on a roll now, feeding off the attention. Tasha actually suggested we start trying for kids soon. Can you imagine? She can barely take care of herself. The room went quiet. Everyone knew we'd been married 5 years without children. A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged. I mean, let's be honest, Matthew continued, oblivious to the tension. Some people just aren't cut out to be parents. Right, honey? Something inside me crystallized in that moment. All these years, I'd kept his secret out of love, out of loyalty, out of some misguided sense of wifely duty. I'd endured the jokes, the mockery, the constant undermining of my confidence. I'd smiled through the humiliation while he built himself up by tearing me down. But this? Using our private struggles to humiliate me while painting himself as the superior partner? No more. I set my wine glass down carefully, my hands steady for the first time all evening. The truth about our childless marriage was about to become tonight's entertainment. Matthew, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, maybe you should tell them about your doctor's appointment last year. The smirk froze on his face. Honey, you're drunk. Maybe you should get some water. I'm not drunk. Actually, I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. I turned to face our friends. Would you like to hear a funny story for once? Matthew stood up abruptly. Who needs a refill? Brad? Jennifer? His voice had an edge of panic. Sit down, Matthew, I said quietly. You love story time, remember? The room grew tense. Our friends glanced between us, sensing the shift in dynamics. Matthew's face darkened as he realized his usual tactics weren't working. Tasha's had too much wine, he announced, trying to regain control. She gets emotional when she drinks. Remember that time at the Christmas party when she... When I what? I interrupted. When I caught you making up stories about our sex life to your friends? Or when I overheard you blaming me for our lack of children? Jennifer set down her wine glass. Matt, maybe you should let her speak. Oh, there's nothing to say, Matthew laughed, but it sounded forced. Tasha's just being dramatic. You know how women get sometimes. Do I get dramatic when you mock my cooking? My job? My appearance? My voice was getting stronger. Or am I being dramatic about the real reason we don't have children? The color drained from Matthew's face. He moved toward me, reaching for my arm. Honey, let's talk about this in private. For a moment, I almost gave in. The familiar urge to protect him, to keep his secret, bubbled up inside me. He must have seen my hesitation because his expression softened. I'm sorry if I went too far with the jokes, he said, his voice gentle. You know I love you. Let's just enjoy the rest of the evening. Brad nodded encouragingly. Come on, Tasha. Matt's just playing around. He doesn't mean anything by it. I almost believed it. Almost fell back into the pattern of smiling and pretending. Matthew's hand was on my shoulder now, squeezing slightly. A warning disguised as affection. Remember what we talked about, he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Some things should stay private. That's when I saw it clearly. The manipulation hidden behind the concern, the threat beneath the tenderness. All these years he'd used my silence as permission to humiliate me. My discretion had become his weapon. You're right, Matthew, I said, standing up. Some things should stay private, like your jokes about our sex life, especially since... I paused, meeting his eyes. When was the last time we actually had one? Tasha, he growled. Don't. What's wrong? I thought you loved jokes. I turned to our friends. Want to hear something really funny? For 2 years, my husband has been... Matthew lunged forward, knocking over his wine glass. This isn't funny anymore. No, I agreed, stepping back. It never was. Since we're all sharing funny stories, Jennifer suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe we should talk about what you told Brad last week, Matt. Matthew's head snapped toward her. What? About how Tasha's frigid? How she's the reason you can't... Jennifer's voice trailed off meaningfully. The room went deadly quiet. I stared at Jennifer, then at Brad, who was suddenly very interested in his shoes. You've been telling people it's my fault? My voice was barely a whisper. Honey, they're misunderstanding, Matthew stammered. I was just venting to Brad. Guy talk, you know. Guy talk, Jennifer's voice rose. You've been telling everyone at the club that your wife is defective, that she's the reason you can't perform, that she's... Shut up, Matthew shouted, making everyone jump. You don't know what you're talking about. But Jennifer wasn't finished. I heard you at Susan's party, too, making jokes about how Tasha probably couldn't satisfy any man, how she's lucky to have you because no one else would want such a... That's enough! Matthew's face was purple with rage. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. All this time, I'd kept his secret out of loyalty, while he'd been spreading lies about me, making me the joke not just in our home, but everywhere. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, it's not enough. Not nearly enough. I turned to face our friends. Want to know why we really don't have children? Why Matthew makes jokes about our sex life but never actually talks about it? Why he's so desperate to make me look inadequate? Tasha, please, Matthew begged, his arrogance finally cracking. Think about what you're doing. I have thought about it. For 2 years, I've thought about it. Every time you mocked me in public, every time you made me feel small, every time you blamed me for our problems, I thought about it. I looked around the room, at these people who had laughed at his jokes for years. My husband has been impotent for the past 2 years. Complete erectile dysfunction. That's why we don't have children. That's why he invents stories about my inadequacies. That's why he needs to tear me down in front of everyone, to hide his own issues. The silence was deafening. Matthew stood frozen, his face ashen. The doctor said it was likely psychological, I continued, my voice steady. Suggested therapy, but Matthew refused, said he didn't need help. Instead, he decided to cope by turning me into a punchline. You promised, Matthew whispered, his voice breaking. You promised you'd never tell. And you promised to love and respect me, I replied. I guess we're both disappointments. Brad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Jennifer was staring at Matthew with undisguised disgust. The others shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. For the first time in our marriage, Matthew had no clever comeback, no cruel joke to deflect attention. He just stood there, exposed and humiliated, exactly how he'd made me feel for years. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. In revealing his secret, I'd freed myself from its weight. Now everyone would know the truth behind his cruel humor, the insecurity driving his need to humiliate me. You've ruined everything. Matthew's voice was low, dangerous. You think this is funny? You think humiliating me makes you better? No, Matthew, I don't think humiliation is funny at all. That's the difference between us. He turned to our friends, desperately trying to salvage his reputation. She's lying. She's trying to embarrass me because she's jealous of my success. You know how she gets... Stop. Brad's voice was firm. Just stop, Matt. We've all seen how you treat her. Oh, so now you're taking her side? Matthew laughed bitterly. After all the times you laughed at my jokes? After everything I told you about her? That's exactly why, Jennifer interjected. The things you've said about Tasha, they were cruel. We should have said something sooner. Matthew's face contorted with rage. You want cruel? Fine. He turned to me, his mask completely gone. Tell them about the promotion you're so proud of. Tell them how you really got it. My heart stopped. This was the one area where his jokes had never ventured. My career. Tell them about the late nights with your boss, he continued, his voice dripping with venom. Tell them why you really got picked over more qualified candidates. The room went silent. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was character assassination. Actually, a new voice spoke from the doorway. I can tell them about that promotion. Everyone turned to see Alex, my boss, standing there. I had forgotten she was coming over later to drop off some contracts. I've been standing here for a while, Alex said, walking into the room. Long enough to hear you try to destroy your wife's reputation to save your own. Matthew's face went pale. This is a private matter. Nothing's private with you, Matthew. Isn't that your thing? Making everything public? Alex turned to the room. Tasha got that promotion because she single-handedly landed the Peterson account. She stayed late working on the pitch, yes, with our entire team. I know because I was there every night. Alex, you don't have to... I started. Yes, I do. She cut me off. I've watched you shrink yourself for years because of him. Not anymore. She faced Matthew directly. Your wife is brilliant at her job. She earned everything she has. The only person riding on someone else's coattails in this marriage is you. Matthew looked around the room, searching for any remaining allies. Finding none, his expression turned ugly. You think this makes you strong? He spat at me. Turning my friends against me? Exposing private medical issues? You're pathetic. I stood up, gathering my purse. No, Matthew. What's pathetic is building yourself up by tearing others down. What's pathetic is blaming your wife for your inadequacies. What's pathetic is thinking that cruelty makes you powerful. I turned to our guests. Thank you for coming. I think the party's over. As people began gathering their things, Matthew made one last attempt. If you walk away now, don't bother coming back. I paused at the stairs. That's the first funny thing you've said all night. Because trust me, Matthew, I won't. Word spread quickly through our social circle. Within a week, everyone knew about Matthew's behavior. Not just his medical issues, but the years of cruelty he'd inflicted on me. His carefully crafted image as the charming jokester crumbled as people began sharing their own observations of his bullying. At the country club, where he'd loved holding court with his humor, people started avoiding his table. His jokes fell flat when he tried to mock others, met with uncomfortable silence instead of laughter. Even his closest friends kept their distance, particularly after Jennifer shared more stories about his vicious lies. The final blow came at his firm's annual dinner. Matthew tried to tell one of his funny stories about me, forgetting I wasn't there to be his punching bag anymore. Someone in the crowd spoke up. Is this going to be as accurate as your other stories, Matt? The room erupted in snickers, not at his joke, but at him. He stormed out, humiliated. Later I heard he'd gotten drunk at a bar, ranting about how I'd ruined his life by betraying his confidence. But here's the thing about confidence. Real confidence doesn't come from tearing others down. It took losing my marriage to find mine. But as I packed my things and moved into my new apartment, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The last time I saw Matthew, he tried to make a joke about my moving boxes. Nobody laughed. Turns out cruelty isn't so funny when everyone can see it for what it really is. 6 months later, I barely recognized my life, in the best possible way. My promotion led to even bigger opportunities at work, and without Matthew's constant undermining, I finally felt confident taking them on. Alex became not just my boss, but a close friend, someone who celebrated my successes instead of mocking them. Jennifer and I stayed in touch too. She filed for divorce from Brad a month after our dinner party, saying my stand gave her the courage to face her own unhappy marriage. We meet for coffee regularly now, laughing about things that actually are funny. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly simple. Matthew, so afraid of further humiliation, agreed to my terms without argument. His final attempt at a joke, "At least now everyone knows why we never had kids," fell flat when my lawyer simply stared him down. Last week, I ran into him at a restaurant. He was dining alone, trying to chat up the waitress with his usual jokes. She wasn't laughing. As I passed his table, he called out, "Still can't take a joke, Tasha?" I stopped and turned. "Oh, I can take a joke, Matthew. I just finally realized you were one." Walking away, I heard something I'd never heard in our marriage. Silence from Matthew. No comeback, no mocking laughter, just quiet acceptance of his new reality. These days, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who's done being the punchline of someone else's cruel jokes. I see someone who found her voice, her strength, and her smile again. Turns out the best revenge isn't just exposing a bully, it's reclaiming your joy.